You're listening to the Synergy Leadership Podcast, a discussion with engaging, empowering, and enlightening leaders about the greatest competitive advantage in business and entrepreneurship that often goes unrecognized: a team's energy. Here's your host, the woman who puts the energy in synergy, Karen R. Jenkins.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Synergy Leadership Podcast. I am so excited to bring back, after popular demand, Ms. Brenda Anderson of the Galilee Agency and also part of the KRJ Consulting team. Brenda is joining me today to talk about a very, very special topic. Today's topic is synergy leadership, leading through uncertainty and fear. Brenda, welcome to the podcast, or should I say welcome back to the podcast?
Well, thanks, Karen. I appreciate the opportunity to come back. And yet I feel like I've not been gone too far. So I've been involved and engaged with KRJ since the last time I was able to join you on a podcast. And the journey has been extremely exciting and rewarding. And so again, I am very excited about where we are now.
Oh, thank you. And I'm so glad you're a part of the team and just a great resource for us, not only as my mentor and my coach, but as my teammate now. So it has been a wonderful ride. So Brenda, 5 years ago, as a matter of fact, almost 5 years ago to date, you and I came together as a result of the COVID crisis that took our country and our world by storm. There was a lot of unknowing, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of uncertainty. And as a result of that, you and I, after getting feedback from our network of people and friends, put together a program called Crisis to Confidence. And it was basically to assist individuals to lead them through the uncertainty and the crisis, because it was something that we had never endured before. There was no looking back to say, well, is there a guide? Is there something to help us make it through this? We could even Google it to find out, what we should be doing. And we launched a 4-week program, started out with a 1-hour complimentary session. But I want to talk a little bit today because I think the information that we shared in that program is viable and needed today, because of all the challenges that we've been facing through, just in the last 5 years. It's been natural disaster after natural disaster, some impacting areas that never, ever you would have thought would have been impacted. You had fires that have wiped out total communities. You had hurricanes that hit communities that had never been hit by a hurricane before, that we never would have thought, like in the mountains, really. And then there's the human aspect of it, the national side, the national challenges that we're seeing from the political unrest and everything else that's going on in our communities. I thought it would be good for us to just tap into some of the tips and strategies that we shared years ago, because we are facing a lot of the uncertainty and a lot of the chaos and a lot of the crises that, not the exact same ones, but the emotions that go along with what we're seeing today are the same emotions that we saw years ago. So if you don't mind, share with us some of the tips, or let's just dig into some of the tips and strategies that we talked about. In our first session, we gave out 6 strategies. Let's cover a couple of those with the audience today, because I think it's definitely something that they need to hear. And if we're in a situation and, it's like, listening to the news and the social media and everything else is going on, and all of a sudden, all this fear is going on, what is that first tip that you shared that you think would be applicable today that people can apply immediately?
Well, Karen, first, before I even get into talking about the strategies that you and I shared 5 years ago, I just want to express wow. Wow. And as we look at where we are today, 5 years later, one of the things that we talked about during that presentation 5 years ago was, the reality that we were living in what we now refer to as the new normal. Okay. And what happens when you begin to normalize, the uncertainty, sometimes you may not recognize that you are experiencing distress. You may not even recognize or acknowledge that there are some changes that you need to make. And so what we acknowledge is that though the world was significantly impacted by the pandemic, it significantly changed the way we view the world. When we look 5 years later and see where we are today, we acknowledge that some of the things that happened during the pandemic continue to impact and affect us today. And so as we are dealing with some of the natural disasters, some of the unrest that we see around the world, and even as we are facing some of the more recent transitions in our country alone, we recognize that some of the impact that we experienced 5 years ago, we're experiencing today. So my first response is, wow. One of the first things that we talked about during the presentation 5 years ago is that when we looked at the pandemic, we acknowledged it as the great pause. We said it was a pause. It was a disruption. It was an interruption in the way we experienced life, the way we conducted business. Business was no longer business as usual. It was business as unusual, to quote one of my favorite resources. And yet, where we are today, we are looking at some of the same experiences of the great pause. We're seeing interruption, we're seeing disruption. And so one of the first things we acknowledge in our strategies is that you first must understand and accept what we call embracing your fear, is acknowledging the uncertainty and the chaos. You cannot change what you do not acknowledge. And so some people may not acknowledge it as fear. Some people may say, I'm concerned, I'm worried, I don't know. And then some people may just say, it'll all work out. Regardless, the reality is, are you experiencing some disruption, some interruption, and perhaps will you experience some interruption and disruption? The first strategy that we encourage you to think about is, how am I experiencing this? Is it fear? What is it that I'm experiencing? Fear is a natural instinct to protect us. And so it's not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength for you to acknowledge and to embrace your fear.
Those are some great tips. Great tips. We have to acknowledge, and sometimes we're so grounded in where we are, we're so in our heads that we don't even realize what's happening. And what I'll share with the audience is that fear brings on stress. Stress increases our cortisol levels. Our cortisol levels impact our health. So we have to take control. There's certain things in life that we have no control over.
Mm-hmm.
And we can only work on and control the things that we have that are within our control. And when you switch your mindset to that process of, let me just focus on the things that I have control over, you tend to not be as stressful. You tend to not feel as helpless and hopeless because there are things happening around you that you don't know whether you're coming or going. And it's like every day there's something new. Every day there's some other thing that is happening or that you're hearing that is happening. And what we have to do is kind of bring our focus back inwardly to our specific area, our specific network, our specific world, and focus on that. And that's the tips that I've given my team. That's the tips I've given my family. That's the tips that I'm living by, is that I have to focus on me, my network, and what we have going on. What plans do we have in place? What things do we need to be working on? And I would say what things we need to prepare for, but just like in COVID, and the example that we used back then was that every challenge that as a nation, as a family, as a business, as an individual that we have gone through, something we've gone through it. So the common denominator with each one of those things at the time was that we had gone through it. With COVID, because it was so new, it had never happened before, and it happened so fast and so rapidly. We were kind of in the midst of the storm, and we knew we would come through it, but we didn't know when. We knew we would come through it, but we didn't know how. We knew it was there, we didn't know why. So there were so many unknowns with the COVID thing, but even with that, we have come through that. And with every challenge that we face today, even though some of them are horrific by losing whole communities with fires and negatively impacted by hurricanes and challenges that are happening from a political perspective, we will come through it. So
one thing I wanted to also acknowledge, and I think this is something, is how you reconcile faith and fear. I am a person of faith, of deep faith. And one of the things that, I acknowledge again is that even spiritually, you may be struggling and asking for understanding. That is also natural. It is not to say that you are not a person of faith to ask those questions. It basically reinforces that you are a person of faith. And so that's one of the things that I also wanted to add when you embrace your fear. People say fear and faith aren't reconciled. I believe that the instinct of fear has been given to us to protect us so that we can do those things that you just said. We can acknowledge a plan of how do I deal with this. If you don't acknowledge it, it's very difficult for you to shift and move in a new direction. So I wanted to add that as well into the observation of embracing your fear. The two can reconcile and balance off. Is when you are just going to walk by faith, which is great. And yet, where are you walking to?
Yeah.
And I need to acknowledge, okay, what do I need to change in order to continue to walk by faith?
And I love the faith in knowing. I have a prayer circle that I have in my family, and we pray a lot. And I tell people sometimes we have what I call spiritual amnesia. And that is the fact that, again, we have had situations that we've had to pray for, and we've had scenarios that have occurred to us, and we have been taken through every single one of them. And then we get to the new issue and the new concern, and we go, I'm spazzing out. I don't know how I'm gonna get through this. Well, you don't need to know the how, right? That's not up to you. That's what the faith is about. And we get the spiritual amnesia that everything else prior to this has been taken care of. So why wouldn't this be taken care of too? So our mental health is important. And, I'll share this one with you. And I saw this on something, I don't even remember what it was, but this guy was talking about are you a thermostat or are you a thermometer? Right? Whereas a thermometer is going to tell you what the temperature is, right? So if it's catabolic out there, it's catabolic. If it's 75 degrees, it's just 75 degrees. The thermometer has no direction on if it's high or low. It just tells you what it is, right? And there are people out there that just mimic the temperature of their environment. There are people out there that just mimic, if it's 80 degrees, then I'm gonna be in the 80-degree weather. If it's 40 degrees, then I'm gonna be in the 40-degree weather. But there are people out there that are thermostats. And regardless of what's going on outside, regardless of what's happening in the world, they set their own temperature. They get to set the dial themselves. They get to say, if it's too cold, I can turn it up to warm myself up. If it's too hot, I can turn the air conditioning part and cool off somewhat. And that's what we have to teach ourselves in this current environment, that regardless of what's going on outside of us, regardless of what's going on in our country, in our worlds, that internally we have to set our own thermostat. Absolutely. And do it regardless of what's happening, because that too shall pass. And we don't want to be in that position where we've psyched ourselves up so bad and there's so much fear and all of this other stuff that, we can't function. We'll be like a deer in the headlight. You kind of stop and then nothing's happening. You have to focus on yourself. And one of the tips that you and I shared that I thought was viable to bring to our audience today was, in all of this, we have to take care of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And you said it earlier, we have to assess our current reality, even if we're not quite sure what the reality is going to be today versus tomorrow versus next week. A reality can change. And then when we can turn it in and look at our current reality, we're in a position where we can determine what our needs are. versus what our wants are. Like at this point, we're going to have to buckle up and figure out kind of, I like to say, devise a plan, but have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, because there's so many unknowns right now that the biggest plan that you can partake in is the taking care of yourself, the having the mental capacity to shut all of the incoming, overstimulating, negative news broadcasts that are coming in either via your television, your telephone, or on your social media sites. Get away from being overly fed negative catabolic information, because where your mind goes, your energy flows. And what you focus on, you get more of. So we have to be very intentional in ensuring that we have to be prepared. Again, where are we now? What do I need right now? What do I want right now? And know the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And then come up with a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And through all of this, being very attentive to your mental health, being very attentive to your moods, because here's what happens. The energy that you carry affects people. One of my favorite sayings is, you're responsible for the energy that you bring into the room. And you wonder why people are having all of these fights and these disputes and these road rages and road rage killings and all this other good stuff. Well, if you consistently feed somebody news and media and social media, all this negative, 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 and they're all wired up like this, when they get in the car or when they're out there with you, you know, what do you expect? You have to be intentional and be very conscious of what you're going to allow in your space. What music are you going to be listening to? What shows are you going to watch? It needs to be something that is not all hyper overstimulating, negative, kill them up, bang, bang, shoot them up. Just let's lay back. Let's sit back. Let's have a moment of peace amidst the storm.
One of the things that I am learning is how violent our language can be. Not only just listening to it, is how words we use. Being mindful of the types of words we use. You'd be amazed at some of the language that we use every day and realize how much violence is in it. And even just those words that we use, you're like, shoot your best shot. Just think, shoot, shot, you know. It sounds simple. And yet, as Karen talked about, that stimulation also impacts our stress level. And words we use, how we communicate, things we listen to impact the way we respond and oftentimes how we react.
Yes.
And there is a difference between response and react. And we share more about that in our work around building confidence through crisis and chaos.
Yeah. So, Brenda, it was good that in the COVID crisis in 2020, we actually created that playbook, which was a step-by-step process of what you needed to do to go from crisis to confidence. What areas of your life that you need to analyze, what steps that you need to take. And these were actionable things that you could put into play immediately and know kind of a roadmap or a GPS of what you needed to do. And there are a lot of things that we're working on, but we've been hearing from at least the people that we've met with and the people that we talked to a long time ago that it was time for another one. So, Brenda, I think you want to share a little bit about what we're working on when it comes to the next Crisis of Confidence 2.0.
Well, one of the things, as I said, you know, Karen said, welcome back. I felt like I have not been gone too far because I've been engaged with KRJ Consulting for a few years now, and we've worked on some very exciting and dynamic programming that we want to continue to share with you. One of the things that I'm so excited about is we've created this new community we're calling the Cineverse that you would want to be a part of. And entry into that Cineverse is us giving back what we know is needed. We're going to be offering several programs over the next several months that you don't want to miss. And yet, before we even get into the programming, we're going to offer a complimentary session to talk about where we are today as it relates to leading through uncertainty and the chaos. And so we want to share with you that coming soon, and I'll let Karen give you all the specifics about it, we are going to be offering a complimentary 1 hour session that's going to highlight some of the strategies that we have included in our workbook around leading through uncertainty and crisis. We're now leading through uncertainty and chaos. We are going to share with you some of those strategies. And we're also going to introduce to you how you can join the Cineverse, because this is going to be a dynamic community. One of the things that we know that when you're going through crisis and when you're going through chaos, you're going to need to be a part of a community that shares some of the insights and shares some of the values that you have. And so we're very excited about the launch of the Cineverse. And more importantly, we're excited about sharing with you some of the programs that you'll be a part of when you join the universe. And to learn more about that, you don't want to miss our complimentary session coming up here in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for sharing that. And for those of you who are not part of our current community, as far as making sure that you know when we're launching things or when things are happening, make sure you go to our website at krjconsulting.com. Up top right-hand corner, it says join our community. That's our newsletter, that's our broadcast, that's where we're sharing great content and tips on things that you need to know to be a good leader, to be a successful entrepreneur, just to live a peaceful, successful life. I'll give you a little bit of background on the Cineverse and how it started. Years ago, as I was growing my business, I would go out at different times and present. I would do training workshops for small businesses. I'm a professional speaker, so I would go out and have speaking engagements, and never failed that somebody would always come up to me after the session. Karen, that was great. I really loved it. Can we have coffee? Can we go to lunch? Because I love to, continue to pick your brain. And back then, if we were local, answer was yes, because I believe in giving back. I believe in helping others. I believe in sharing the information that I know. And as my business grew, I got to the point where I just didn't have the capacity to continue to meet with everybody that wanted to meet with me, but I hated not being able to say yes. So a very close friend of mine, I listen to Lewis Ellis, who is my mentor, my coach. I'm her mentor, now I'm her coach. We're just partners in crime, not really. But we go to meals, if not every week, every other week. And we would sit there with our favorite restaurant, and we would sit there and just brainstorm and help each other and talk and bounce stuff off of each other. So I'd call, hey, what you doing? Nothing. You got time? Yeah, meet me at meals. That was our thing. She would call me, hey, you got time to meet me at meals. And we were talking one day about how my business had grown and how I didn't want to say no. So we just came up with the idea of, why don't I have a group mentoring coaching program, and I can invite these small businesses in to come in and pick my brain, just whatever you want to talk about. It gave them the opportunity not only to hear from me, but to meet other businesses in the area that they might be able to partner with, learn from. And then when they ask me a question, guess what? I got to answer the question, but somebody else might have a different perspective that they got to also hear. So they don't, I will tell you, if I tell you something, go validate it. Don't believe everything I say. And I hope you do that for everybody else that you're listening to as well. But it became a thing, and we called it Meet Me at Meals. Years went by, and I got a new teammate, bless her soul. She recently passed away, Jermaine Bankhead, who said, Karen, well, Meet Me at Meals is good, but nobody knows what it is. Like, it doesn't really tell what you're going to be doing. So she came up with the name Eat, Learn, Grow. So in her honor, I give a moment of silence for Jermaine, who left us way too early. But we ended up calling it Eat, Learn, Grow. It became a bi-monthly and then a quarterly event. I just relaunched it last week. It was phenomenal. The people that came out, we only had 20 seats. They were full. People still wanted to come. But, again, the restaurant only holds a certain number of people. So from that, and talking to them, realizing that not only did we want to help people locally, but we want to help people nationally. because the things that we talk about, the things that we share, the information that we're doing to help businesses, to help leaders, to help people, right, needed to be shared with the nation. So we came up with the Cineverse. So the Cineverse is going to be our online community that provides some of that same level of information and camaraderie and connection and just resources that we're going to be continuing to provide. So be on the lookout for the launch of the Cineverse. It is coming soon. Be on the lookout for, we're going to relaunch the Crisis to Confidence, because again, right now that's needed. And then we'll do some other programming that we'll be doing through the Cineverse. So we will continue to carry that flag, because again, at KRJ Consulting, our mantra has been and always will be that we want to help people add value and make a difference. And that's what we're doing every day. So join us in the Cineverse so that you can also be impacted by that mantra, but also take it on and do that within your communities as well. So Brenda, as we come to a close, do you have any parting words or things that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, the one thing that, and we'll talk more about this, did you want to tell them about the 19th, February 19th?
February 19th, we will be hosting the first round of the Crisis to Confidence complimentary session at no cost to you, where we will give you the 6 tips to get you started in the playbook. And these are great things that can help you move from uncertainty and fear to confidence, moving from crisis to confidence. So that's the first event. So by the time you see this broadcast, hopefully you're ready to go out and register. Registrations will be open by then. And we look forward to seeing you. And share this broadcast, please. There are people that need to hear it. Share it with your family, your friends. I hope you got some tips out of this. Share it with your network. Letting people know that there's a resource out there to help them is powerful. And that's your way of giving back as well. So thank you for that reminder, Brenda. I thank you all for joining us in this episode of the Synergy Leadership Podcast, finding out exactly what you need to do to deal with the impact of uncertainty and chaos. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode.
And we look forward to seeing you in the Cineverse.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Synergy Leadership Podcast with Karen R. Jenkins. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe, rate, review, and share our show. See you next time.